Hi, JCRC, AJC. I'm here to answer a couple of questions for you over video because I know that we are not in person, and I'm happy to answer your questions. So the first question you asked, and I'm going to read it off, is given the steep rise in anti-Semitism and racism, what will you do during your term to combat such hate and encourage bridge building between people of different backgrounds? Well, first, in this first term of mine in Congress, this is something that we have had to tackle head on, and we're bringing together everybody around these topics, particularly here in Michigan's 11th District, working with our local chapters of AJC, some of our community advocates, as well as different affiliated partners. You might recall that my colleague, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, started the Black Jewish Democratic Caucus in Congress. And that is so important to bridge together the ties that we have in combating racism and anti-Semitism together. We will say it very loud and clear that neither one of these things has any place in our community, that these actions lead to violence. These words lead to loss of life because people become violent as a result. And we've got to educate our students as well, which is why I support early childhood education efforts to teach about racism, to teach about anti-Semitism, to teach about the hatred that is manifested over history against the Jewish community. So we realize that we will never go back to that. And that is a torch that I am carrying forward towards progress going into my next term in Congress and working alongside all of you. I'm leaving no stone unturned. I am not afraid to blow the whistle, and I am going to continue to not only work with our community partners and advocates, but also work alongside my colleagues on both sides of the aisle so we can be united against racism and united against anti-Semitism and not be afraid to call it out wherever it rears its head. Secondly, you ask about the U.S.-Israel relationship becoming increasingly partisan over the last several years at many levels of government. Do you agree with this assessment, and how do you think this trend can be reversed? Well, first and foremost, I do believe that many people are taking the tone around the U.S.-Israel relationship as something that is harmful and maybe anti-progressive, and they're linking together false reasons for that. One of the most important things that I did my freshman year of Congress, this first term, it was over a year ago, is I went to Israel for the first time. I got to travel to Israel with 40 of my Democratic colleagues and over a dozen Republican colleagues. And I got to bring a special guest, and I brought my mother, and it was her first time to Israel. And can you imagine going to the beautiful state of Israel with your mom for the first time and many of your colleagues who you work alongside with, getting to experience this incredible land, learn its history, meet its people, share in Shabbat dinner in Jerusalem, looking over the beautiful city and seeing all of its lights. It was absolutely remarkable. But also, coming from Michigan, something that I want to share about the U.S.-Israel relationship, which is so important, in addition to the national security element of it, is that we have very strong economic relationships. And these relationships tie into what we're doing here in Michigan, and they're going to tie into rebuilding our economy coming out of COVID and continuing to strengthen our economy. And what am I talking about? The incredible investments that Israel has made in its innovation and technology sector for automobiles and for mobility, this U.S.-Israel business partnership, Michigan business partnership in particular, coming out of U of M, the universities over in Israel that are producing such important innovations that we want access to. I used to meet people all the time, particularly when we were buzzing around in different ways, who were working for companies that were headquartered in Israel, and they were employed by those companies here in Michigan. And so that's another part of our partnership. And we are at an inflection point. We are seeing Israel bridge new divides, reach peaceful solutions. We're continuing to push for that. And Look, people can be critical of Israel, but not necessarily be against the U.S.-Israel relationship. There's something very particular, very special about this democratic-aligned relationship, particularly over in the Middle Eastern region, and we've got to stay committed to educating and keeping people's eyes open and really learning the history. So I could go on and on about this topic. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about as a member of Congress. I am really eager to work with new members of Congress on this, and I'm going to continue to push for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. And look, we don't want to be naive to maybe some directions and where people are going, but as a Democrat, I'm always going to be committed to this, and I'm going to make sure that my party and new members of my party are as well. Third question that you ask: politicians and the public have understandably been focusing their attentions towards COVID-19 and the racial divides plaguing our country. Therefore, other issues, such as the immigration crisis, have been decreasingly disappearing in the public eye. How can we ensure that during this difficult time, immigrants to this country, especially those in prison at the southern border, are not forgotten? Wow. What an amazing question on a multitude of levels. First and foremost, allow me to say that sometimes, and a lot of times, this president is really exhausting and very distracting. And he throws a lot of things at us that we have just got to tackle as news of the day. It can be exhausting being in the Congress and trying to tackle all of this and not seem like we're rolling over. And yet it's also important to make sure that issues like the one that you're asking about as it pertains to immigration are not left at the back burner. I have been absolutely dismayed and sometimes horrified by the statements coming out of this administration and their approach to immigration reform in this country. First and foremost, what's going on at our border oftentimes is wholly unacceptable. Separating families, putting children in cages, and leaving people in the lurk, not acceptable. We have also got to strengthen our immigration system so that we have a path for people who are tax-paying citizens, law-abiding citizens, and who want to become full, realized, actual U.S. citizens, have a path to citizenship. So I'm already calling them citizens, but they're residents, and we've got to have a path to citizenship for people. And so we have got to remember our roots as a nation. We have got to remember what it means to have good, sound immigration policies that are fair, that treat people as human beings, and understand also that we are a nation of immigrants, and that if the American dream only exists for the people who live in this country, then what is it? Does it really exist? That is a famous quote. Those are not my words, but they are words that guide my approach to governing and working to make change. And I want to thank you all for asking that question. Let's keep pushing on it. We've got an election coming up, but we also know that elections are only one piece of it, and that the work really begins when we can start governing. Last question. You said short answer. What is your number one priority while you're in office? My number one priority is building a government and making a government that it works for everybody. We've got to have equal opportunity. We've got to have manufacturing jobs. We've got to be supporting good public schools for every student. We've got to be supporting clean air, fresh water, and good accessible healthcare for everyone. This is all tied together. And so that's what I'm working for every single day. That's the agenda that I'm a part of, and that's the For the People agenda, and let's get it done. Thank you all so much. You're amazing, AJC.